it's difficult for them to get to the point of like abstract thought and realizing like my dignity comes from within as I was created and is not negotiable.
Right.
It has no bearing on anything else out in the world or what anyone else has to say about me. I already have that, and it can never be taken away.
And I'm sorry, did you say this for young, like little ones?
I think it's for little ones, but definitely for the grown-ups too. Right? We all probably have that moment.
I think all of us struggle with it to a certain extent. This episode of Beyond Sunday is brought to you by Assumption University in Windsor, Ontario, one of Canada's most historic Catholic institutes of higher learning, tracing its origins to 1857. Learn more about their online graduate diploma in Catholic Studies by going to assumptionu.ca or follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Welcome to Beyond Sunday, a podcast for parents like us, striving to weave the Sunday experience into the everyday moments of our week. I'm your co-host, Nicole Joyce.
And I'm Rakhi McCormick, your other co-host. Grab your pom-poms and megaphones and join us as we talk, laugh, and reflect on our experiences raising Catholic families and allowing God to transform our everyday lives. So, Nicole, you seem like a cheery person. You're always, you're excited, sometimes excitable. Were you a cheerleader?
First off, thank you for calling me cheerful.
You're welcome.
I don't think that's the first word that comes to people's minds when they say, describe Nicole. No one's like, oh, she's so cheerful. But I have had people come to me and at conferences or big events and be like, Nicole, you're always in such a good mood. You're so happy. And I'm always like, really? Are we talking about the same person?
Who am I?
Is this a different Nicole? I don't know.
You have me mistaken with someone else.
But I think it's because when I'm around a lot of people like that, especially if it's an exciting event, I do tend to dial it up. I want to make sure everybody really feels like I'm happy to see them. And
calling back to previous episodes, we want to be sure that we're filled with joy.
Yes.
Because joy attracts people.
Yes, so I could see why people might use the word cheerful, I guess. That's
you are, however, deflecting the question.
Yeah.
Were you a cheerleader, yes or no?
I was a cheerleader
I knew it.
For 4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, those little cheerleaders are so cute.
Yes, I was a tiny cheerleader.
Oh, they're so cute. Mm-hmm. But it also just makes me want to break out my spirit fingers at you, which I won't. I'll sit on my hands. So I will not break out my spirit fingers. We're not really talking about cheerleading as the sport at this point, but that's not where we're headed. But we are, in a way, talking about cheerleading today. It's kind of a roundabout way.
I'm going to need to hear how we get there. Okay, go ahead.
Well, so again, I'm sitting with the Sunday Gospel, prepping for our episode, and the verse that pops out at me is from Matthew 23. The greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And it made me think of one of my greatest challenges in raising slightly older kids, maybe not the young ones, but as they're approaching adolescence, is how do we keep that healthy balance between encouraging them to be proud of who they are, to accept and appreciate their gifts, but also then not turn into prideful, boastful, braggy people.
Yeah. And I think in today's world, we always hear about the sin of pride, and it makes it feel so morbid, this will be your death, right?
Because it's the root of all other sin, right?
Yeah, so we kind of make it, we kind of maybe...
Pride with the really big P, heavy,
We go a little overboard maybe on don't be too
on
prideful.
One end, but then on the other end, I feel like it's a world that focuses very much on me.
Yeah.
Right? How can I be the best? How can I be recognized? How can I be number one? And so it's this unhealthy balance of two extremes.
Yeah.
And a misunderstanding, I think, of what both of those things are.
Absolutely.
What is humility? What does it mean to be humble? I think sometimes we think that it's either we're humiliating ourselves or we're boastful.
Yeah.
And those are two very big extremes that don't really get at the heart of what Jesus is talking about here. And as parents, what we're trying to do with our children or for our children.
Yeah. I mean, I think as parents, what we really want is we want our kids to find a balance. We want them to be able to experience pride for their work and pride for their gifts and for their accomplishments. But we also don't want them to lose their humility either. And sometimes that's difficult even for us.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you've ever had a kid play any sport ever, you've seen some of those parents who maybe go a little too far, swinging one way.
We get really into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not that kind of cheerleading.
Yeah,
Not that kind.
No, you know what kind of parents I'm talking about.
We do.
You've all seen those people.
We do.
On the sidelines.
Yes. Extremely involved.
Yes.
Invested.
When I only had one kid playing a sport, I thought maybe it was just those sport parents.
Oh, no, it's
right. I was like,
all,
is it just basketball parents? And then I had a kid play baseball, and I was like, oh no,
we're calling out the basketball parents, are we? That's the only one we have.
Yeah. So then I met the baseball parents.
Yeah.
And then I met the soccer parents. Then I met the fencing parents.
Yeah.
And most recently, I met the cross country parents.
Okay.
Which
Cross country seems chill.
You gotta scream though if you want them to hear you because they're running so
that's
far.
fair. Yeah.
So it's not like an aggressive.
It's just
scream.
loud.
It's just like I got to be loud because he's like all the way over there, and I want to know
that seems like one of the more chill sports.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. But I think that still goes back to this misappropriation of terms, right? Like, what does it mean to be proud of your children? What does it mean to appreciate their gifts and to encourage them? And I think that we really have gotten into this headspace where they have to be the best, they have to be the best, and they have to be the best. And we're going to scream and we're going to shout and we're going to fight people until they recognize that my child is the best.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think a healthy appreciation for that and what we tell our children, then we want you to try your best.
Yes.
You don't have to be the best at everything, but we want you to be your best.
Yeah.
And that conversation will be between you and me and the Lord, right? Like, you don't need to outshine everybody else. You just need to shine.
Yeah. So I'm going to sound a little crazy here.
Do we really need to have that?
No, but this is going to be one of those moments where you're going to be like, this is why Nicole doesn't think people should call her tearful.
Okay.
I don't always tell my kids they have to try their best at everything. Number one, I always say try your best when it comes to things like being part of a team, like on a sport, for sure. Like if you're going to join a team, then you should be giving 100% because you're part of a team and that's what everyone there should be doing. But I think there are in some cases, some particular things, like for example, a school project where are you giving it a reasonable amount of time?
Yeah.
Are you committed to a reasonable amount of research? Are you following all of the instructions? Are you making sure that you did everything that you're supposed to be doing to complete this? And you're exhausted? Okay, then that is good enough.
Sure.
Right? So sometimes I don't say you have to do your best. You just need to give it the right amount of
Let me couch the best. Are you giving it the best effort you can in this moment?
There you go. That's a better way of putting it.
That's really what it is, right? Like, and again, we were raised very much, both Tim and I think were raised in a way where like you had to be the best, right? At least it was in my house, right? Like if it's an A, why not an A plus? If it's an A minus, why not an A? Definitely don't bring home a B.
Sure.
And so we are very different in our approach in that respect. Like, yes, grades are important because they indicate that you're learning the material or not learning the material. But at the end of the day, like we just want to know that you are putting in an effort that demonstrates your integrity.
Thank you. That's probably where I was going with that. It's more about like you have a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I want you to give everything that deserves it a fair amount of attention. But I don't want you to break your neck, right? Like I don't think that your drive for excellence needs to be so excessive that it's boiling into other parts of your life where it doesn't need to be.
But again, and I think this goes back to like that whole idea of being proud or being prideful and what is best and what is the best.
Yeah.
And so I think that also helps our children to prioritize. To recognize that there are certain moments that certain areas of our lives are going to shine and other areas are going to have to just be good enough. And good enough sometimes is good enough. It's still good.
Yeah.
It's still good.
Yeah.
But that we're putting in our best effort with what we have. And if we're exhausted, it's important that we rest so that we can continue to put in a good effort tomorrow. But at the same time, if we're exhausted because we chose to misprioritize and played games for 6 hours and now we're just putting in 20 minutes on this project, then that's going to be a conversation that we're having because you're not trying your best.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah, and I think from like a kid's standpoint, like when they are really good at something, for example, the first thing that kind of came up here was this idea that we should never assume that we're like superior
Right.
to others or inferior
Yeah.
to, but like we should always be recognizing that we all have equal dignity, right? Like
Right.
we were all made in the likeness and image of God. And yes, some of us have different gifts or different talents, but pride comes in when we assume that we have somehow achieved a level of superiority to others.
100%. Right. And I think that there is a natural competitiveness that comes with some things when we're in school, and even as an adult, there's competitiveness. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just try to remind them they're only competing with themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Unless they're, I guess, in cross country and they need to win the race. Like, fine. But even then.
Yeah, even in cross country though, like there's some really fast kids,
Yeah.
right? So he does still compete against himself, right?
Yeah.
He can, there's an app for that, right? There's a fencing app, there's a cross country app. So anyway, on the cross country app, you can see all your times.
Yeah.
So he competes against himself.
Sure.
He knows that he's not going to come out there first race ever in his entire life at all of
Yeah.
12 years old in 2 days and win the race. But he can definitely be like, I want to beat my last time by 6 seconds.
Yeah.
Dude, that's a lot.
Right.
Good.
Well,
Make that your goal.
I will say this too. I think that one of the challenges in parenting, and it's something that I noticed just reflecting on my own childhood, is when we have kids who are naturally inclined to certain things, there is this expectation that they will always be the best at it. And when they're not, this devastation that maybe it's not a talent anymore.
Sure.
And so being able to root that in, are you doing your best? Like, did you put in your maximum effort? Is it good? Is it beautiful? Do you like it?
Right. Do you still like doing it, or is it draining you?
Do you feel proud of what you did? If this didn't happen, if so-and-so's wasn't recognized more than yours, would you still be proud of what you did? And that's the measure, right? As opposed to now measuring yourself against that person and being prideful in thinking that you needed to have beat whoever it was at whatever that was.
Yeah.
On the flip side, the humility part, right? Like, I think our kids also struggle with that. Like, I know just recently, like, we have musical auditions are coming up, and my daughter loves to sing and she's good at it. She has some natural talent that can be refined through instruction. But she was like, I think I want to go for the lead, but I don't want to go for the lead. I'm like, okay, why don't you want to go for the lead? Well, I just, I wouldn't want to take it from someone else. I'm like, it's not prideful for you to want to do something that you are good at and enjoy. Like, you're not going for the lead because you think you're the best and no one else should be able to do it. You're doing it because it's a role that you think that your talent naturally is inclined toward. And so really helping them, again, like, it's such a fine line. Right, especially junior high, because all the emotions are there, all the hormones are there, their brains aren't formed, they're not making the most rational choices.
Applesauce brain.
Right.
Go on. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so to help them really work through, what is the root of the desire?
Yeah.
What is the root of the desire? Is it to be better than somebody? Or is it that, gosh, I really like this role and I think I would enjoy it a whole lot? Because that is just being proud of a gift that you have and you want to use it and share it and have fun with it. Versus I want to beat out everybody else.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the conversations that we've had in the past about always being in prayer and always being in discernment. And one of the things I try to remind my kids, especially when it comes to things like this, like really discerning what do you want to participate in and what do you want to give your time and energy to, is number one, that God came to us in our humanity.
Right.
And that God speaks to us through our human desires too. So sometimes your human desire is good and it was given to you for a reason, because it's something that he's gifted you with and that he wants to see you really use for a beautiful, wonderful purpose. It's not always disordered, and I think sometimes we have a tendency to think like any desire we have must be disordered. This is all just,
especially
me
if it's
being
centered
tied to sin.
right.
And
or if it's centered on something I want, and then we think that it's selfish or it's self-absorbed.
Yes,
but that's
exactly.
not always the case.
So like really encouraging them to think like, is this something that you have a deep desire to do? Like, have you prayed? Like, do you feel like this is really something that the Lord is asking or calling you to do and asking you to use your gifts in this way? I think is a really helpful tool for figuring out how to walk that line.
Absolutely. And again, I really think, and this comes in when they're a little bit older, to be able to talk to them, what does it really mean to be humble? Right? Because I do think that there is this sense that being humble is just not thinking of yourself at all. Like, not just being self-deprecating.
Right. You don't have to be a doormat.
Right.
To exercise humility.
Like, Christianity is not about us being disciples. It's not about us being doormats.
Yes.
Right? And so really this idea of, gosh, I'm going to forget. I think it might have been C.S. Lewis that said it. I'm not going to remember, but it's not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so it's not downplaying our gifts. That doesn't actually make us humble. That in itself is somewhat disordered thinking. And it's in some ways rejecting the gift that God has given us.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with a priest friend of mine. This was years ago when I had all tiny kids in my house. And I kind of felt this desire to want to go back to work, right? Like outside of my house. I was still working, obviously. Actually, I really was working still. I was teaching natural family planning. But I really wanted to, move back into a ministry kind of job, and it was clear that there was not time for that where we were in our life phase, right? And I remember talking with him about it and saying how much of a struggle it was, because I knew that I needed to be at home, but I really just had this yearning to do something more outside the house. And I said, maybe this is just a really big exercise in humility for me, that like I'm not the right person to be doing this kind of work. And he said something so profound to me. He said, Nicole, sometimes we violate our humility when we just lay down our desire and pretend like it doesn't matter. And I'd never heard someone say, like, you can violate your humility by being too humble. Like you can do that. But it's true, right? Because really what he was saying is like, sure, maybe you have really genuinely discerned that this is not the right time. This isn't what God's asking for you right now. But don't dismiss a desire that God's put on your heart like it doesn't matter anymore, right? Like you can still acknowledge that it's important,
right?
And if you dismiss it, you're violating humility in a completely different way than you set out to do, right? Like I convinced myself that this is how I was going to be humble,
right?
But he was able to kind of help me see, like, your humility still needs to include that your desire is important. It's just not what you're being called to do with it right now.
And so maybe the humility is being able to surrender the desire.
There it is, yeah.
Right, as opposed to pretending it doesn't exist in the first place. Yeah. And I think that hits on something really, really profound, in that I think when we deny what we're feeling, that it doesn't allow for the light of grace to touch it.
Sure.
Right. And so then it manifests itself in very in ways that can be destructive. Whether that's self-loathing, whether it is not going into things that we would otherwise excel at. And so we're not allowing God to be glorified through what we have been given. And I think that's the other conversation with the children, like, it's okay to be good at things. It's good to be good at things. God has made us to be good. God has made us good. He's made us very good. And he has given us gifts that are good. The question is, are we the ones tooting our horn? Or are we allowing God to use the gift that he has given us to be glorified through us?
Yeah. That's real helpful. So I think if you're listening right now and you're thinking to yourself, I have definitely gone overboard on the humility. This message is for you, right? Like, we want you to understand that there is a balance to be struck here. But if you're the person who's like, oh man, maybe I messed up going the other way, to know that it's so helpful for your kids, for you to acknowledge your mistakes, right? And to make amends in whatever way it needs to happen, right? So if you are that soccer parent, basketball parent, baseball parent, and you feel convicted right now as a result of that, this is a good time to have a conversation, a heart to heart with your children, and let them know, and to make an apology. It's so important that we model this 100%. Example of humility and coming before the Lord and saying, like, I made a mistake.
You know what? And I would say that on the other end too, if you are the person who catches yourself always deflecting compliments, always being self-deprecating, and you notice that and you're convicted with it, I think it's also a good opportunity to stop and say, you know what?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Because they need to learn that they are good.
That's I think that's our last point too. Like with kids too, sometimes I think some kids don't know how to accept compliments with humility. I've definitely seen that happen with my own children.
Yeah.
Like I have one who was in a musical last spring.
You do.
He was
the lead.
He was the lead, yes. And it was really hard for him to have people come up to him afterwards and be like, oh, you did such a great job. You should be so proud. And he was kind of like,
what do I do with that? Yeah, I know. But truly, I think, again, it is that false sense of humility. And I had a friend, I don't remember what stage in my life this was, but she would always respond, thank you. It's a gift. And so, yes, we acknowledge that what we did was great, and we acknowledge the source of that goodness.
But you can have your kids practice that.
Yeah.
And we definitely did. And he's a teenager, so you can imagine there was a lot of eye rolling when we made him do it. But we were like, okay, I'm going to say something nice about your performance, and you're going to say thank you.
Right.
Without sounding sarcastic, without rolling your eyes, without scowling.
Or without going the other way, other way, and being like, yeah, I know.
Right? Yeah. And so, yes, encouraging them to practice that is very important, and helping them to understand that it's okay to accept that someone appreciates a gift that you have in a certain way without going too far in the opposite direction, right?
Right. And if you find that you have difficulty in that, practice that yourself as well. I'm not speaking from experience at all. I'm terrible at accepting compliments. Terrible. It makes me so uncomfortable. And my husband, Tim, calls me out on that all the time. He's like, they are really appreciating you. They're not making it up. I'm like, they just don't know me well enough yet. And he's like, you stop. Stop.
This is what I feel like when people call me cheerful. I'm like, are you?
And we've come full circle.
Because I feel like we're talking
but sometimes
about
our
else.
self-image does not match up to the image that other people are seeing. And so we need to step out of our self-image to be able to really see ourselves as God and other people do. And so to be able to accept the compliment and accept that maybe somebody sees something that is good in us. And in that way, too, avoiding the need for outside validation.
Yeah.
Right, especially with our children. So I think like we need to get to the point where we can build them up so that they understand the goodness that just comes from being created in God's likeness and image. You know, rather than needing to win the award or get the best grade or be affirmed by the popular crowd in school, that we are rooted in that knowledge that we are fearfully and wonderfully made and irrevocably loved by God.
That's so hard to do when you're little, though, because you learn from experiential existence.
Oh, yeah.
Like that things from the outside come in, right?
Yes.
And so it's difficult for them to get to the point of like abstract thought and realizing like my dignity comes from within as I was created and is not negotiable.
Right.
It has no bearing on anything else out in the world or what anyone else has to say about me. I already have that, and it can never be taken away.
And I'm sorry, did you say this for young, like little ones?
I think it's for little ones, but definitely for the grown-ups too, right? We all probably have that moment.
I think all of us struggle with that to a certain extent. But truly, it's such a gift to be able to get them to that point. And it's not going to be perfect. It's not. But speaking those words of affirmation, we've talked about this, to speaking that into them, to be able to build that muscle and that memory, even when they're in the midst of a hormonal crisis and they think they are just the worst.
We're still talking about the teenagers, right? Are we talking about the moms?
Yes. Whatever.
Another one of those moments where it could apply to a lot of people.
But like to be able to know that whisper that we're hearing is the voice that says you are loved, you are good, you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the midst of whatever else is going on in life. Yeah. Even when you fall flat on your face, that doesn't define your goodness. And then you can be humble about that and get up and be like, yep, that sucked. Moving on. And so it becomes part of our perspective. Like, do we believe that we were created good? Because then we don't need to boast about how good we are. Because really, I mean, and I tell this to my kids all the time, your bragging is just a call for attention, right? You just want somebody to say you're good.
Yeah.
And so let's preempt that.
Yeah.
Let's just tell you are.
Amen.
You might not be good at that, but you're good.
Well, our challenge for you this week, parents and families, is to practice the virtue of humility this week. I know.
We don't want them saying the litany of humility, which is a dangerous prayer.
We are not asking you to lay down and be doormats. We're saying just exercise in small ways what that could look like. And for your little people, like super easy ones, right out of 52sundays.com, are things like let someone else go before you through the door. Try not to boast, right? Try to give someone a compliment. There are lots of ways to do this that are very real and tangible, especially for our young people.
And not super cheesy and unnatural.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And do that with your spouses too.
Amen.
You know, I think sometimes we get into the busyness of raising these little people and we forget that we need to hear that we are good and loved. Well, thank you for listening to Beyond Sunday. We hope you found this conversation helpful as we navigate the high wire of raising humble yet confident disciples. Find more episodes at 52sundays.com/podcast or subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, don't forget, you can reach us at beyondsunday@aod.org.
This episode of Beyond Sunday has been brought to you by Assumption University in Windsor, Ontario, one of Canada's most historic Catholic institutes of higher learning, tracing its origins to 1857. Learn more about their online graduate diploma in Catholic Studies by going to assumptionu.ca or follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.